Joining us on the latest discussion from Washington, D.C., Saurabh Gupta, Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist from the Institute for China-American Studies, also in Washington, Anton Vidashian, a history professor from American University. Last but not least, in Chengdu, Rong Ying, who is the chair professor at Sichuan University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. So are we recovering from yesterday, everybody?
Yes, we are.
Saurabh?
Yes, we are, and hopefully it'll take time.
Yeah. What about for you, Anton?
Well, it was a long night and a surprising end to it, although not so surprising for some here.
Right. Do you think the result necessarily going to make what they call MAGA possible, make America great again, quote unquote? Saurabh?
Well, we'll have to wait and see, of course. That's certainly the program. But then again, when has a U.S. president been in the White House that hasn't thought that America is great, or at times that it was in decline because of his predecessor from another party? I can't think of a single example. Every time there's a presidential campaign, the opposing party trying to get into the White House argues that everything's going downhill and therefore they should be elected. And every single president asks for God's blessing for the United States and certainly acts as if it is still the hegemon. And Joe Biden, by the way, was absolutely no exception to this. So the question for me really is a difference in style, not a difference in content.
Interesting. Anton just brief us about that, what he thought. Saurabh, what about some of the issues? Inflation, distribution of wealth, division among different parties and supporters, as well as the vision for America in the future. Are these problems deep-rooted, likely to be resolved through whoever's policy?
No, they are very, very deep-rooted issues. In fact, these are some of the reasons Mr. Trump won in 2016, and that he's back again in 2024 suggests that those policies are deep-rooted. They're here to stay, and the challenges will be difficult to resolve for a country which is aging and losing some of its momentum and its productivity capability. On the fundamental issue that did bring him to power, which was the cost of living crisis, which is not just restricted to America. It was a major issue in the Japanese election too, and it is the case in advanced country economies because real wages have grown slowly in an inflationary climate. This has put pressure on the leaders, and this is one area where Trump, he could mess up, but he also has the potential now that inflation is under control, that there could be another growth spurt, and that there could be a greater stabilization, at least at the surface in terms of growth. But whether there's distributional and inequality challenges will be resolved, I have my doubts. And Mr. Trump does not have solutions. He just has populist appeals in that regard.
Anton?
The economic question is outstanding, of course, but we'll see what Trump does. But he does inherit an economy whose fundamentals seem to be strong, but he also inherits an absolutely massive debt. And that's something that his administration will, first of all, contributed to when, during its first term, the Biden administration contributed to it even more. And the Trump administration will now have to deal with it. Compared to America's allies, especially in Europe, however, the American economy looks positively healthy for all of its problems. And I agree completely with Saurabh that one of the ironies is how unevenly the wealth and the economic performance has been distributed, because as we saw in the election, and remember that Trump actually won the popular vote this time, unlike 2016, the majority of Americans did not think that they were profiting to the same degree as a minority of Americans. And by that, I don't mean people who voted for Kamala Trump. I mean the real minority, that several percent who are actually raking in money. So this is a systemic problem, and we'll see whether Trump's laissez-faire policies will actually turn it around.
Saurabh, we have seen some shifts of traditional belief of so-called supporting groups for different political parties this time, and it's quite clear. State of Ohio, for example, and the list goes on. So how are people digesting the latest shifts, quote unquote, and changes? What does that mean overall for American politics?
I think it makes it fascinating for American politics, especially that category of blue-collar working class, which used to be a solid, long-term Democratic constituency headed by the union vote. And while the union vote still stayed with Kamala Harris, that blue-collar, white, rural, non-college educated cohort has transitioned away from the Democratic Party and has become and has joined Trump's party, the Republican Party, which was thought to be the party of big business and free market ideology. So this is a very radical shift. We saw the beginnings of that shift right in the Hillary Clinton versus Trump election. Mr. Biden was aware of it, and that's why he had such a robust industrial policy. But the results of industrial policy take time to be felt. And meantime, the cost of living crisis during these past few years just accentuated the difficulties of that cohort and larger group of very average, the median voter. Yeah. And I think they have become a real toss-up and have become the fundamental foundation for Trump's electoral coalition today.
All right. And there's a lot of discussion also about what's happening to so-called liberalism. Of course, all the isms has a very complex explanation. I wouldn't go into details, but just generally accepted concept liberalism, there seems to be some question marks as a result of this election. As an intellect and as an intellectual, how are you observing this discussion in the U.S. and probably beyond?
Wei, you flatter me, but I accept it. Thank you very much. So the question of liberalism is an excellent question because we are at an inflection point in the history of liberal and progressive democracy. It's very interesting to live through. It used to be that liberalism in the 20th century version of it was a movement that championed the interests of the middle class, specifically in the countries in which that middle class resided. In the past 40 years, after the end of the Cold War, with the disappearance of socialism as a Soviet-led system and challenger and impetus for capitalism to sort of restrain its most voracious characteristics, in the past 40 years, liberalism has turned into a globalist phenomenon that is rewarding the populations of the countries less, but rewarding their elites more. And I have to say, and if no one's seen this, I encourage your viewers to read the letter that Bernie Sanders just published about why he believes that the blue-collar working class of the United States just turned away from the Democratic Party. And he put it very simply that when the Democratic Party turned away from the blue-collar class, the blue-collar class turned away from the Democratic Party. In other words, he's pointing back to the importance of socioeconomic class, not gender politics, not identity politics, which was really what the Democrats, a lot of Democrats, not all, but a lot of Democrats made crucial in their campaigns. And we just saw the result within the past 24 hours.
Of course, all of these questions will need to be further discussed and researched. I'm sure it will come back in future discussions of our program and certainly on many other media outlets. Having said that, though, let's move on. from how to look at the election from within the United States to how the rest of the world is reacting. After all, it is the largest economy in the world, and the presidential election in that country and the policies of whoever is being elected will have an impact on the rest of the world. So here I would like to have Mr. Rong, Professor Rong, to join us. We have seen a long list of international leaders representing their country to congratulate Mr. Trump, the president-elect. Of course, these also include leaders of international organizations such as UN Secretary General. We also see Chinese president together with the French president, as well as countries such as Israel, such as Ukraine, and the list goes on. Congratulate Mr. Trump, and some were even having phone calls with Mr. Trump, even though some of the details is not known. So, Mr. Rong, from someone who has created quite some controversy during his first term in international governance and relations with different countries, to now a long list of leaders congratulating him after he's winning the election, how do you see this interesting contrast and transformation, if I could use that word?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly, I think for leaders around the world, the change of guard in Washington, a new president, even though it's not so new, it would certainly means a lot. And establishing a kind of sort of relations in terms of sending a congratulatory message certainly is the beginning. And I also noticed that in their congratulatory messages or the way to express their congratulations, you see the differences or you see the efforts that they have made regarding their respective emphasis or priorities or aspirations or expectations regarding their relationship with the United States, and also I think in and as a whole that they are expecting the new administration will be sort of they are having, and that reflects the I would not say difficulties, but the importance of understanding the changes or the shift that have taken place in domestic in U.S. politics. But more importantly, I think it also reflects the kind of proactiveness in communicating, engaging United States, the most important sort of country in the world, in the hope that the change of the government, the change of the guard would bring more stability rather than the unpredictability that has been speculated.
Certainly, great response, Mr. Rong. But to you, Professor Fidashian.
Listen, unpredictability is going to be the key word. We saw all of this from 2017 until 21. Here's what we can say with a reasonable amount of certainty about Trump. First of all, he will have a very easy time appointing the people he wants to be in power, including the Secretary of State. And we know that because the Republicans have a majority in the Senate, and it looks like, although this is not yet final, they will have a majority in the House. Trump will be one of the most powerful presidents in recent American history. He will, for at least 2 years, have the run of the place. There's a reason why foreign leaders are calling him, because they want to establish a working relationship with them. Now, the smart ones stayed out of public commentary during this election, and that, by the way, includes the Chinese. The less smart ones, and I'm being very diplomatic here, put their eggs into Kamala Harris's basket, and will now have to be reaping the rewards. And the Brits are unfortunately at the forefront of that. We'll see how that works out. But everyone is waiting to see what happens, but trying to get onto Trump's good
I
side.
see.
America First is going to be the policy. Again, that's not terribly different from anyone else's policy, but it will be practiced in a much more open way without a diplomatic filter. So let's all buckle up because starting January 20th, we're going to be on a roller coaster ride.
Mr. Gupta.
Foreign leaders understand that there are many difficult issues with the United States and with particularly a Trump administration. It's going to become complicated, the relationship, and it's going to be disruptive. On top of that, Mr. Trump himself revels in being a disruptive person. So I think at a very minimum, they would want to have at least good relations with Mr. Trump on a one-to-one basis. That is doable, even with countries where he has very major issues. Mr. Trump has been able to strike up good relationships, and that itself can moderate both U.S. policy and Mr. Trump's personal policies. And I think from that reason, at this point of time, the main purpose of the outreach and the quick congratulations is to build up that one-to-one relationship with Trump, which I think will be very, very important going forward, given the challenges.
Right. Well, gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to continue our discussion about the result of the U.S. presidential election and its impact on the U.S. relationship with the rest of the world. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. The world's largest import-expo, a global stage for trade and investment. A place for meaningful connections. In times of uncertainty, CIIE has become the hub for shared opportunities. And that's why we are here for the 7th time. I am moderating panels at the Hongqiao Forum, leading discussions with trailblazers in global trade. Catch it all on World Insight from Shanghai. Embrace trade. Embrace the future. Welcome back. I'm Tian Wei, and this is World Insight coming to you live from Beijing. Still with us online, we have Surabh Gupta, Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist with the Institute for China and American Studies, also in Washington, Anton Fedosian, History Professor from American University, and in Chengdu, China, Rong Ying, Chair Professor at Sichuan University. Gentlemen, welcome back. Earlier, we talked about the impact of that U.S. presidential election on the interactions among leaders. Certainly, the Chinese president has already sent his congratulatory message to Mr. Trump, the president-elect of the United States. And here is what that said. We already read this at the very beginning of our show, but I think it's important, given the importance of bilateral relations between these two countries, to share with our audience again. He suggested that history shows China and the United States both gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. The Chinese president says a stable, sound, sustainable China-U.S. relationship serves the two countries' shared interests and meets the aspiration of the international community. And he also suggested that both sides will practice mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation. He also seeks to strengthen dialogue, communication, proper manage differences, and expand mutually beneficial cooperation. Now, to you, Professor Rong, who has been working on China-U.S. relations for decades, I know a lot of these words are very familiar to your ears because they're pretty much the principles that China has been sticking to when it comes to bilateral relations with the United States. But at this moment, any of these words, when you hear it now, really echo with you?
It is true.
You have to choose. I know there are many of those, but maybe one or two as an example.
Yeah, certainly. I think these words are very familiar. To any observers of the relationship, but more importantly, I think for the policymakers in both in China and the United States. What strikes me most, of course, is not only the word, but the combination or the logic or the sequence of these words. I think the message starts with the history, the historical perspective, as this year marks the 45th anniversary of the diplomatic relations. And of course, by history, China is taking even longer perspective. So cooperation benefits the two, and competition, no, I mean neither side. I mean everybody is going to lose. That's the most
Confrontation.
important. I, yeah. So confrontation is not good. And but the most important thing is, for me, is I think the three S words starting with S: stability, stable relationship, sound relationship, and more importantly, this relationship has to be sustainable. I think being a sustainable, as we're looking for a sustainable relationship, we need to follow the principles, working principles that help the relationship. I mean, the past years, past
Mm-hmm.
decades, that comes to the reason why the emphasis now putting on the three principles: mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation. And the last but not least, I think President Xi's message made very clear his view how to pursue such a relationship, and in the context where the question or the way of getting along along well in the as the relationship is facing unprecedented difficulties and
Okay.
at the stand at critical point becomes relevant and important.
In it, to me, very interesting and certainly predictable in a way, it's dialogue and communication. Now, whether both sides agree with one another or not, understanding what the other side means is the very beginning of everything. And also trying to figure out how can we solve problems if there are problems is certainly the way to go, at least in the civilized world. So, Mr. Gupta, to you, how do these messages sound to you?
I think they're obviously very important things that Mr. Xi has said. Yes, he has repeated them. And one can understand the value of these words. They sound simple when they're just spoken out of the mouth, but we have seen through the Biden administration years, the first 2 years, there was so much disruption in that the administration didn't have a real fixed view against China. It talked about extreme competition, had many of its export controls. The relationship was volatile. And then from the Bali G20 summit in November 2022 to thereafter Woodside in November 2023, the relationship was placed within a framework. There was an effort to minimize differences. If there were differences, the goal was to manage them. There was stability endowed to the relationship. The hope would be that this would make the relationship predictable. This took so much effort. It basically consumed most of the past 18 months, and it was a
Right.
very difficult process. And that is what I think Mr. Xi is alluding to, that this process needs to, again, from ground up, the ball needs to be rolled up the hill, but it needs to be done because it is just that much more important in the context of the important consequential relationship that U.S.-China relations are.
Right. But Professor Fidashian, you see, globally, we're facing so many challenges. While at the same time, there are opportunities, right? There are forces that are bring the world back, but there are also forces that actually could give us a step forward. New technologies, how to take advantage of it. AI, artificial intelligence, so what to do with it. Meanwhile, outer space, how to develop it together. And also, at the same time, challenges like climate change and others. How to reform WTO, and the list goes on. So how do you think there's another chance to articulate all of these important challenges and opportunities, Professor Fidashian?
Yes, that's right. There is another chance. And I think that the first condition for the United States engaging with the rest of the planet is for Trump to temporarily, at least, abandon the messianic exceptionalism that is unfortunately so ingrained in the American political psyche, especially here within the Beltway in Washington, where I am. The assumption that the United States can do anything to anyone at any time has been a very powerful drug for American foreign policy, starting in the the very last quarter of the 20th century and going all the way up to now. And the Biden administration, unfortunately, for all of its good intentions, was the poster child of this attitude. We can do whatever we want, and if someone doesn't agree, we sanction or bully or force them to basically agree with us, and diplomacy be damned. If Trump just takes a short exception from this rule and approaches diplomacy in an interactional way, this can actually make a huge difference. The problem with Trump, of course, is his personality. And the moment things don't go his way, he flies off the handle. But we'll see if he learned his lessons from his first term. He surrounded himself with neocons. Then many of them have turned against him. Let's see what happens the second time around.
Right. I have to say our time is very limited. There are so many questions I have still in mind about this very interesting twists and turns of changes in our world. But one have to note, right after the U.S. Presidential election result was revealed, you also see other changes going on in the world. For example, the Israeli Prime Minister fired his defense minister. You also see a German chancellor fired the finance minister, and the list goes on. So it is certainly a world that's experiencing tremendous changes. Certainty and what kind of certainty is needed. Before we go, I think it's fair that we invite some expertise from the three of you as observers. Mr. Rong, would you like to go first? I think everyone has 10 to 15 seconds only. Please.
Sure. I think the very fact that China, at the very beginning, just after the new administration.
Okay, 10 to 15 minutes, seconds only.
Okay.
Please.
I think the message from the Chinese side has sent very strongly is that China is looking for predictable and stable relationship, and China is ready to work with the United States.
Professor Pitachian.
I would say that the most important thing is exemplary exceptionalism as opposed to messianic exceptionalism.
All right.
If the United States places itself
Mr.
as an
Gupta.
example to emulate, many will follow.
Mr. Gupta.
The most important thing U.S. and China need to do is to see each other as an opportunity. When Mr. Xi and Mr. Trump meet up, both of them should come up with one proposal how they can.
All right, we have to wrap it up. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.